This is, first of all, the House District 60 forum. Marianne Proctor is the incumbent state representative. We're going to probably spend 25 minutes to, maybe we'll go a little bit longer with this, but please welcome Marianne Proctor to this forum.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Marianne, you're a freshman. You're just finishing your second General Assembly session. Coming in, you beat a popular longtime incumbent, Sal Santoro. And here's my question. Was Frankfurt everything you expected it to be?
That's a loaded question. Yes and no. It has been a very interesting experience for me. I think there's been a lot of great things. I've met some amazing people, and the people of Boone County that I wouldn't have got to meet had I not run. I've become very aware of so many of the issues impacting us. What was surprising to me about Frankfurt is how little sometimes our legislation matters, how much is controlled by leadership. And so you can submit all kinds of bills that are brought to us by you all. And for it to come out of committee, and committees can sometimes be a challenge. And then lobbying the chairs to hear the bills it was more of an arduous process than I had anticipated.
How about the schedule? There are some people that have this perception that legislators just go up there and they tell people what to do. Tell us about the schedule, because I've seen it up close and personal. Tell us what your schedule's like.
Well, it depends day to day, and certainly what part of the session we're in. We don't have a lot of staff like they have in DC. We don't have people that read bills for us. We do that ourselves. It just depends on the committees that you're on, but you're going to various committee meetings, meeting with constituents, maybe meeting with lobbyists, going to various meetings, and then you're in session when we're actually on the floor voting on various measures that comes up. So it can be really long days. Certainly at the end of session when the bills are flying back and forth, we can be on the floor from 10, 12 hours.
It is a demanding time, and it's a busy season too. I've seen it. Appreciate you serving there. Let's start out with an issue that you have made a priority this last session, and that's certificate of need reform. How many of you are familiar with that topic, certificate of need? I'm just curious. Okay, a good number of you are. For those of you who are not, there's a provision on our state statutes that says that if a new medical provider wants to move into a community, existing medical providers have some kind of say or even veto power over that. And you made an effort to reform that. Tell us about that. Why is the issue important, and what happened this last session?
Well, this issue is important because I think during COVID exposed weaknesses in many things. It certainly exposed the weaknesses in our schools, and it exposed the weaknesses in our healthcare system. Boone County is a rapidly growing county, and the demand is greater than our ability to be provided for. So I myself am a healthcare professional. I've served as a clinician, as a case manager, and in management. So I understand good healthcare and what that looks like. So it came to me from the constituents. When I was knocking doors, I heard overwhelmingly, we want choices in healthcare. So in the state of Kentucky, we have 32 different services and technologies that are regulated by a government permission slip. You must apply for. You have to go through a state formula, show that there's a need, go through a 9-step complicated process. It's very expensive, and then you have to see if that gets approved or not. There's 2 steps along the way that somebody that has the dominant provider, that they are able to sue you. And so that happened to the Christ when they tried to come over several years ago. And so for me, that seemed a little bit silly. But there's a myth that if we don't have the certificate of need, that our hospitals are going to close and they're going to fail. But what's happened since 2004 with certificate of need in place, we've actually had 4 rural hospitals close with this in place. So it does not protect our rural hospitals from closure. In our states to the north, Indiana has 1 certificate of need, and that's for long-term care, and that's been in place. They've repealed their certificate of need in 1999. And Ohio repealed theirs in 2012, and they only have 1 certificate of need, that's for long-term care. South Carolina just reformed certificate of need, got rid of it last legislative session. Georgia's doing it, and this year Tennessee has made significant changes to their certificate of need. So given our surrounding areas allow for competition and we don't, it's not beneficial for our people, because where do you go as an employee if you want a raise, you want a promotion? Where can you go because there's not the competition? If you want a second opinion, where do you go? And for us, we have to go across the river. And then you're taking your healthcare dollars across the river, and for some people, insurance doesn't cross state lines. You may be out of network, so you maybe can't go. It's a hardship for our people, but I don't know why we want our payroll dollars going across the river. Why don't we keep our healthcare professionals here? Allow people choices. Competition always in every industry. It improves quality, it decreases costs, and in this case, improves accessibility. And with an aging population and not a so healthy population, we have definitely more needs. So that is why I've been so passionate about it, because I myself, as a provider, understand what good healthcare is, and I'm sympathetic to the literally hundreds and hundreds of emails and phone calls I have received from the constituents of Northern Kentucky crying out for choices in healthcare.
So besides the existing medical providers, who else was opposed to this bill?
Well, certainly the Hospital Association. Last year we had a task force to study certificate of need. And during that time, that's a discussion. They spent $275,000 lobbying against repealing any type of certificate of need. And that continues to be, certainly the hospitals are opposed to it and spend a hefty amount of money. I think it's interesting, we just got the report on lobbying that came out for 3 months, the first 3 months, record lobbying, $9.7 million in lobbying in 3 months. Number one was the Kentucky Chamber, followed closely by the ACLU, then the electric companies, and then we had the Pharmaceutical Care Management was number 4, and rounding it out was the Kentucky Hospital Association. Unfortunately, that can have a lot of sway and a lot of legislators down there. My opponent is supported by many of those special interests.
One last note about your position on certificate of need and what you did this last session. Americans for Prosperity endorsed only 3 legislators or candidates this election cycle. You were one of them. And they noted that your stand on certificate of need was a big reason why. Let's move on to another issue that I think is important to Northern Kentucky voters and residents, and that is school choice. House Bill 2 passed this last session, which puts on the ballot the possibility for school choice to come into Kentucky. The state Supreme Court ruled last year that you can't do it unless you change the Constitution. So that's what House Bill 2 was about. You voted for that?
I did.
Tell us your position on school choice in general.
Again, I'm for choice. I'm for choice of healthcare. I'm choices for schools. And like I said, COVID exposed the weaknesses in our public schools and really exposed the divisive racial and gender ideologies that were being introduced and taught in schools. And parents were concerned about that. And when the government shut down our schools and shuttered them, as a speech pathologist, I was very concerned about the schools being closed, knowing when you masking people in that time of isolation, and also so many communication skills that were lost and the learning loss that I think we're still suffering to this day. Many of the private schools were allowed to be open. And so the children were able to go to school and have some sort of normalcy, which I think was very important. So yes, I'm a supporter of it. Again, I heard loudly from the people of Boone County saying that they wanted that. So we were engaged with leadership on to get language that made sense to people. So we're not starting off the constitutional amendment with notwithstanding section, things that people aren't going to understand. So I think leadership did a great job in working with us to get something on the ballot that's understandable to most Kentuckians and allow the people to make that choice, the parental choice of where the dollar goes.
Your opponent, Chris Pavis, has a PAC supporting him in working against you. The PAC is called Better Schools Kentucky PAC. They've received $50,000 from the Jefferson County Teachers Union to help defeat you. How do you interpret that donation and that PAC as far as where you stand? It could be interpreted that you're against public schools. In fact, if I could add, I think one of the charges against those who are for school choice is that school choice is going to destroy public schools. Is that what you want to do?
No, I don't. And what's interesting, my opponent's child is in private school. So I think that speaks for itself. For me, I understand that probably 96% of the people are going to opt for public school. I don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all. I've worked with kids with disabilities and special needs, and to throw them into really large schools may not be the ideal fit for them. I think the parent is capable of making that decision. They know their kid best. But I would like to see our public schools be the best that they can be. I'm not happy with the proficiency in the reading and math scores that have come out, regardless of the metrics that they use. I think Boone County can do better. We have a lot of money in Boone County, and I would like to see those better. So I'm not against the public schools. I would just like to see a return back to academics. I would like to see, I'm glad this session we passed, you got to reinstitute cursive writing in the classrooms. We also, we passed legislation to use math, to get functional math in the schools, and also to return to more of an evidence-based reading program so that our kids are able to read at least at grade level. So I'm supportive of those things and voted for all of those things, as well as the SEEK money that's being pushed out to the schools. So there's a significant increase to the public schools, but if the teachers are not getting raises, that is not on the state legislator, that is on the superintendent and on the school board, and they need to be held accountable for the massive amounts of money that's been pushed out to district level.
Right now, that you mentioned SEEK funding, and this is state funding that goes per student. It's about $4,000, something like that neighborhood.
Change, yeah.
If we have a school choice provision that passes, would you be in favor of the SEEK money following the students?
SEEK money is taxpayer money. I think the taxpayer money should follow the child, not the system.
Okay. Let's move on to another issue, the sanctity of human life. You were endorsed by Kentucky Right to Life Victory PAC. When do you believe that life begins?
At conception.
Ongoing conversation since the Dobbs decision has been exceptions to abortion. Of course, Kentucky has functionally outlawed abortion. There are no abortion centers that are open. We do have the exception of when a mother's life is jeopardized or her health is jeopardized, then an abortion can be done. But there are no rape or incest exceptions. We've seen it in the governor's race last year. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on exceptions?
Life begins at conception. God created us, male and female, in His image. Regardless of how that life begins, I don't think it's any less precious. I think the real question should be, is where is the outrage? If a girl is being human trafficked, we have a human trafficking problem. How do you track it if you have abortions? How is the perpetrator ever going to be prosecuted? Incest is not reported. So you have somebody who could be victimized over and over and over again. And you know what? The perpetrator, he not prosecuted. He lives, the mother lives, but the innocence of life is destroyed. So for me, I'm the voice. I've been the voice of the people and their values. I will be the voice of the unborn because they are created in the image of God and they deserve every chance at life.
Yeah. You'd mentioned, moving on to another issue, you brought up the Chamber of Commerce and how much money they spent lobbying the legislature this last session. They did endorse your opponent, Chris Pavis.
Yes.
I don't know how common that is for them to endorse over an incumbent legislator, but they did endorse him. Did they explain to you what they were looking for as to their endorsement process and why you didn't get it?
Well, no. Part of it, they did invite me to attend their interview, but given the vice president of public relations already had my opponent's sign out in her yard, probably told me I wasn't going to get a fair shot, and her husband has been actively campaigning against me because he represents the dominant healthcare provider. So I don't think that was going to be a level playing field, so hence I opted not to do that because it was very foregone when you have my opponent's yard sign up in your front yard.
Very good. Second Amendment issues. You say on your website, you staunchly support the Second Amendment, and you will fight to ensure that that right shall not be infringed by restrictive red flag laws, gun-free zones, and public emergency decrees and government overreach. April 10th of this year marked the one-year anniversary of the mass shooting at the Fifth Third Bank in Louisville, where 5 people were murdered. In response, the CAR Act was introduced this last legislative session. CAR stands for Crisis Aversion and Rights Retention, which allows for the temporary transfer of firearms away from people on the brink of crisis. Where do you stand on the CAR Act?
I oppose it.
So would you consider that a red flag law?
It is a red flag law, and it's a slippery slope. And who's to determine who's in crises? There's so many potentials for abuse for that. I believe in the Constitution shall not be infringed.
So it's almost becoming a regular occurrence where there are mass shootings. It comes up in the legislature, bills are introduced. There were lobbying groups. I was up in Frankfurt one day when there were lobbying groups that had flags or shirts that were supporting the CAR Act. Number of other groups up there. So you're asked to deal with it, with this issue when there's a crisis that comes up. What's your response to mass shootings? What is the proper role of government when it comes to the mass shootings?
One way to stop the mass shootings is by abolishing gun-free zones, because what stops an active shooter in every situation is the presence of another gun. But I think we have to we've got a bigger societal problem, that life is disposable, it doesn't matter. I think we have to look at the mental health, and we have to look at the role of what marijuana does on young minds. Marijuana that, unfortunately, the legislature passed last year, medical marijuana, which I was opposed to. First of all, it's a 124-page bill, which was loaded with all kinds of foolishness. But a lot of it was unproven science of giving it to children that we know we do have the data that makes them schizophrenic and significantly impairs a developing mind. If you look at every school shooting that was done, every single one of those kids had a marijuana problem. We need to look at that. We got to look at society. Why is life so cheap? What is going on that we feel the need to just take people out?
DEI was in the legislature. There were 3 bills last session. DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. 2 of the bills push back against DEI programs and policies at the university level. 1 bill would have banned DEI at K through 12. Where do you stand on DEI?
I'm opposed to it. I don't know how we got away from recognizing people's merits, how we've got into these class warfares of having certain levels of victimhoods. I don't support it. I myself was a product of the desegregation movement back as a kid and was bused all over the place, and they saw that was a failed experiment. When you try to keep dividing people by races or gender or whatever, it's divisive. And studies have shown that it is actually, in colleges certainly, has lowered the enrollment. The very groups that they were going after to increase and it's had the exact opposite effect. So for me, I voted to get rid of it. I know UK spent $10.5 million in 1 year on the DEI initiatives. I'm thinking there's a better use of money than on divisive policies. Let's get back to every person. We all start off level. We all have equal opportunity, but we can't guarantee equal outcomes for everybody. We all have different talents and abilities. Some people work harder than others. Some people are just smarter than others. Some people have more athletic abilities than others. That's how God's uniquely made us, that we have different talents and abilities. Use them to the best that you can.
Very good. Marianne, you've referenced being made in the image of God. You referenced God. So how does your Christian faith, and I think you've been public about this before, but how does your Christian faith shape your public policy views?
Well, there's two things that impact my policy views. Certainly the Constitution. What is my constitutional responsibilities as state representative? Protect life, liberty, and property. The thing that guides my moral is what is good, oh man, but to seek mercy, love justice, and walk humbly with your God. And those words go through my head every time I walk up those steps. That is my job, and those are the things that guide my votes.
We're winding down here. We've got time for another, maybe 2 questions. My timer is alerting me to the time limits here, so I'm going to try. I don't want to get in trouble with him. Medical rights of conscience was introduced this last session. Senate Bill 239 was proposed by Dr. Don Douglas, Senator Douglas in the state Senate. It would have protected the conscience rights of medical professionals who object to procedures that would violate their conscience. That includes things such as abortion, gender transition surgeries, hormone therapies for minors. That bill passed the state Senate. It died in the state House. Where do you stand on medical rights of conscience?
I would have supported that piece of legislation. I believe Representative Rawlings brought something very similar in the House as well. But I support that. I voted for Senate Bill 150 last year that banned gender reassignment surgery and the hormones, the irreversible hormones therapies on minors. To me, it's child abuse, and my goal is to protect children. And we have the empirical data, as we're certainly seeing coming from Europe, that when they've even stopped doing these surgeries and stopped these treatments because they find them to be harmful.
Yeah, very good. Last question. The Kentucky General Assembly is slowly cutting the state income tax rate while they're replacing it with a tax on certain services. First question, are you in favor of eliminating the state income tax?
Of course.
Yeah. So then the tough question is this, we all want to pay less taxes, right? But the tough question is what services do you put the service tax on? Which I think when this passed, this was before you got in there, when it first passed, I think there was something like 17 different service industries that had a 6% tax, if I remember correctly. But how do you decide what businesses you're going to put that service tax on?
Well, why is that the first question? What are we going to tax? I think the first question needs to be is, what are we going to cut? What are we going to do budget-wise? Where are we spending money that we don't need to be spending? And in full transparency, I did vote for the House budget when it left to go to the Senate, but when it came back, it was so bloated, and we don't have the luxury of line item veto, a 280-page bill that we have just less than a couple hours to go through. And as I'm going through it, I'm like, oh, I can't support that. I can't support that. So to be responsible to the taxpayer money, I voted no. I don't want the first question to be, what do we tax? What do we cut? Where can we save?
Very good. Thank you. I want to thank you for joining us for this one-on-one forum. Like I said in the beginning, it wasn't how we planned, but I appreciate your time. And I think this was useful to all of you, hopefully.
Thank you.
You've got a minute and a half to speak directly to the voters.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody who's here today in person and those watching online. And thank you for letting me to be able to explain my positions and where I am. On May 21st, you've got a clear choice. You have a clear choice and a lifelong Republican, not one who just joined the party in May of last year. You have somebody who is unafraid to come to these forums, unafraid to answer to the reporters, unafraid to answer surveys. I have been accessible, I've been transparent and responsive, and I'm hoping I have represented you well in Frankfort. And my hope is that you will continue to want me to do that and be the voice for the values of the people here, not to the lobbyists. I am not sold to lobbyists. I am sold to the people and will represent you. And you can make that choice on May 21st, and I appreciate your support. Thank you.